Okay, now we're going to talk about components. As you know already, that React uses component-based design. So what we do is we build small components and then we put them together to create bigger, more complex components. So just to get our feet wet here, we're just going to create a simple component back here. Let's see, I got to get over to VS Code. Okay, now what most people do is they will create a folder for their components inside the source folder. So go ahead and right click on the source folder and choose new folder. And they usually call this folder components. So add that components folder to the source folder. Okay, now different people organize their projects in different ways, but this is pretty standard here to do this. Put all your components inside of this components folder. The root component usually stays outside of it, app.js, but all your other components usually go in this folder, and then we'll see a couple other folders that we'll create throughout the course here too, but for now we'll just have a components folder here. Go ahead and right click on that components folder and then choose new file, and we'll just create a sample component. So I'm going to name it samplecomponent.js. Now it should be Pascal case. So what that means, it should be capital S sample, capital C component.js. Okay, so that's the way you want to name your component files. Now in the first React project, we put all of our components in a single JS file. With this approach, using Node and NPM, you basically you create a new file for all of each and every component. And then what happens is when our code compiles, it takes all of those components from separate files and puts them all together into one JavaScript file. But we don't even really see that happening. That's what happens when it compiles our code for us here. All right, so yes, your file names should be Pascal case, so starting with a capital letter, and any new words after that should be capitalized. That's the way you want to name your component files. And then here in that empty file, we'll use the snippet from the extension that we installed. So I'll just type in RAFCE. That's the one I like to use, but you could use other ones if you want. And again, we don't need to include this anymore, so I could delete that import statement. React automatically gets imported into your components for some reason right now. And then notice what this did is it created a function. There's our component. There's the component function right here. That's what defines our component right here. And it names it based off of the file name right here. So we want these to also be Pascal case, starting with capital letters and such. So to get started here, let's just make this a very basic component that just displays an image. So we're going to keep it super simple. So I'm going to go down to the return statement here and delete that div. And then what we'll put in here instead is an IMG element. Okay, now I want to show you something very important here. If you remember, an IMG element is one of those self-closing elements. It only has an opening tag. Okay, now in HTML, when you have a self-closing element like this, you can type it like that. But in JSX, that's not allowed. So what you have to do with these self-closing elements is you have to put a / before the closing, the greater than sign there. If you don't, it won't compile and you'll have errors. So that'll be something that you need to get used to here. Okay, now I want to show you how you can add images to your components. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this logo image. It's an SVG file, and we saw that earlier. That was used in the starter code for us, but we want to display that inside of this component. So what we have to do is import this image file into our component. So right here, I'm going to type in import, and then we can call it whatever we want. So I'll just call it logo, but I could use any identifier. It doesn't have to be logo for this. And then we type in from, and then inside of quotation marks, I need to put a path from here to that file that I want to import. So for me, I'm going to go .. to take me up a folder to the parent folder. And then I noticed that sometimes this IntelliSense helps, and it helps you find the file, but for some reason it doesn't always work. So I would expect to see that logo SVG show up in this list, but sometimes this doesn't work, which is really strange. So anyways, I'm going to have to type it in myself. So it should be logo.svg. Okay, and now if I want to use that, I have to set the source attribute here for my image element. So I'm going to type in src equals, but now I need to use curly braces instead of quotation marks because this is a JavaScript variable. So if you remember with JSX, JSX allows you to mix JavaScript code into your HTML code. But whenever you want to refer to JavaScript code, you have to put it inside of these curly braces here. So I'm going to go ahead and type in that the image that I exported as logo here. So that should put the image on the page here. So now I'm going to add a width attribute, and I'm just going to set it equal to 100 for now. Now that's not JavaScript code, so I can use quotation marks right here. So anyways, I wanted you to see how you can incorporate images into your components, and you have to import them and give them a name when you import them, and then that's how you can set the source attribute here on your image elements. Okay, let's just check and make sure that this is working here. It's just a very simple element. I suppose I should add an alt attribute. So I'll make that just say React logo. Okay, so I'm going to save this. And now let's use this component inside of our root component. So the root component is app.js. I'm going to go over to app.js, and we're going to put it right here inside the main element. So to do this, to add an instance of a component to another component, you add it as if it were an HTML element. So what I need to do here is I need to start with the less than sign, and then the name of my component, which is sample component. And now let's see if the IntelliSense is picking it up right here. So from here, I'm just gonna hit enter. Okay, and now it didn't quite finish things off here. So what I'm gonna do is put the / and the closing greater than sign right there. But what I wanna show you is if you wanna use a component inside of another component, you have to import it. Now, sometimes just when you type this in, it will auto detect it and import it for you like it did here for me. So you need to import a component if you want to use it inside of another component. Sometimes it'll do the import statement for you, but it doesn't always do it, and you have to add the import statement yourself. So here, if I go ahead and do Control S to save my changes, everything should recompile down here. It looks like everything compiled successfully. I'll show you what happens when you get errors in just a minute here. But then if I Alt-Tab back to the browser, there I see my sample component that we put inside of the root component. Okay, let's go back and modify that sample component a bit here. So switch back over to VS Code and then go back to the sample component file. And let's go ahead and here's what we're going to try to do. Let's set this up a little by little here. Let's say that I wanted the size of this image to be dynamic, like based on a variable that we put inside of this component function. So here, if I wanted the width to be based on a JavaScript variable, I would have to wipe this out and then use curly braces instead. And then I'll create a variable in just a second here. I'll create a variable called image width, but that's what we want to refer to. And so that means I need to declare a variable right here. So I'll just go const img width, and I'll set that equal to 200. Okay, so now I had to use curly braces down here with the width attribute because I'm referring to a JavaScript variable. Okay, so if I save that, and it recompiles successfully, and then I'll Alt-Tab back to the browser, and then the page reloaded. It does look like it's bigger than it was before. So now what we've got going on here is our width is bound to this variable. So this is a form of data binding right here, where you've got a variable, and that variable is being used in the user interface here. Okay, so what we're going to set up here is we want to add a button that when you click on the button, it will increase the size of our image here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a button element underneath this one here. So now we usually use input elements for buttons, but you can also use just a plain old button element in HTML. I don't think we covered that in our Web Programming 1 class, but it's a different way of adding a button. So I'm going to use a button element for that. Okay, and now that's different than an input element because it's not self-closing. So what that means is you can put something in between the opening and closing button tags. So what we'll do here is we'll just make it say button 1 just for the heck of it. Now that's going to serve as the label for this button. Okay, I'm getting red squiggly lines here, and that's because I'm trying to return JSX that has 2 elements. I need to return a single element. So I'm going to wrap the image and the button elements inside of a fragment. So I'm going to put my opening fragment tag there, and then I'm going to move the closing one down to after the button here, like that. And then I'm going to indent the image and the button elements. Okay, and that'll take care of that problem here. Okay, let's just go ahead and save this real quick and then go back over to the browser, and here is my button. So I don't know if you're familiar with the button elements, but they're very similar to the input elements that have their type attribute set to button. Okay, so what we want to happen here is that when we click the button, we want the image size to get bigger. So what I'm going to do is add an on-click attribute to this button. And by the way, that has to be camel case. All the attributes you use in JSX are camel case. So it's on-click with a capital C. And then I used curly braces right here because we're going to put JavaScript code. So what I'm going to put inside those curly braces is an arrow function. That's going to be the event listener, the event handler function for when this button gets clicked on. So go ahead and put in an arrow function inside of there, pair of parentheses, fat arrow, and then the curly braces like that. And then I can just do something simple right here like console log. So inside the body of that arrow function, I'll just do a console log, and I'll just make it say click just for the heck of it. Now this isn't going to give me what I want to get started right here, but I can just check this out and see how the event handling works here. So I'm going to save that and then go back over to the browser. And now if I go to the console and press the button, there's my click handler. Okay, so you've worked with event handlers a lot in the first few web programming classes. You just may not have hooked them up like this. This is kind of a React way to hook up event handlers. But we're basically saying that we want our arrow function to get triggered whenever the button gets clicked on here. So rather than do that console log, I'm going to clear that out. Let's say we want to increase the size of the image. Okay, so what I'm going to put inside the body of the arrow function is img width plus equals 100. Okay, so and then what we're hoping for is that that's going to increase the size of the image. Okay, now we're going to run into problems right here. If I do Control S to save it, I get this warning here. I'm just going to ignore that warning. We'll talk about it in a second. But what happens when I come over here and refresh? It reloaded, and then here when I click the button, it crashed. So the problem with that is that I am trying to change a constant. So what I need to do is change this from const to let. So that's why it crashed in the browser here. And by the way, maybe I'm going to go back to showing you that error again. I'm going to change that to a constant and save it. And then I'm going to refresh, and then here it's going to crash because I'm trying to change a constant. So React will sometimes crash at runtime, and you'll get an error in the browser like this. And sometimes it will crash at compile time. And I'll show you that in just a second here. But anyways, here it's saying that there's an assignment to a constant variable. And what I want to do, it's real tricky, but I want to see if I can figure out where the error is. It's a little bit tricky when you see these runtime errors that happen in the browser. But it's trying to help me out right here. It's saying on click. And now, yeah, I'm finding this is difficult to make any sense of this error message. You can look down in the console right here, and maybe that will help you too. But we'll see that most of the time we get compiler errors, and I'll show you what that looks like here. Those are a little bit easier to read. So first of all, I'll fix that problem for now. I'll change that to let, but I want to show you a compile error. So let's say I forget something. I'm going to forget that greater than sign at the end of that line. And now I'm going to save my changes. Okay, so now I get a compile, it won't compile. So I can't even run it because it won't even compile. So here you'll see, hopefully it'll tell you where the error is. So I can see there it's saying that it's in sample component.js on line 12. So that'll be a hint for where you can start looking for your problem. So anyways, it's really important to be able to deal with the error messages because they can be tricky. So you can go to where the error message pointed to and start looking in that area for any errors. I'm going to fix that by adding the greater than sign at the end of that line here. So if I save my changes and reload here, remember what we're going for here is we want this image to get bigger every time we click this button. Okay, so it's not doing that. And the reason why is because the component is not re-rendering. So when we click the button, it is actually updating the image width, and what we want to do is we want to say that when the image width changes here, that we want that image to actually change its width, and that's not happening right now. And the reason why is because in order to do that, in order to set up the data binding so that the user interface is bound to a variable, we need to turn it into a state variable. So you saw that in the last video. I'm going to comment out this line right here, and we're going to turn that image width into a state variable. So to do that, it looks like this. So we declare it as a constant, and then we use a pair of square brackets like this. And that indicates that what we're going to be doing is destructuring an array. And then we set that equal to, and then we call the useState function. Now you're going to have to become very familiar with this because you use it all the time in React. Okay, now a couple things here. So first of all, when you use this useState function, you need to import it. And sometimes it will get imported automatically for you when you type it in, but it didn't for me this time. So I'm going to show you how you need to import it. You type in import, and then you put a pair of curly braces. And then inside the curly braces, you type in the name of the function that we're trying to import. And then after the curly braces, you type in from, and then quotation marks, and then React, like that. Okay, so that's how you import the useState function. All right, now back to this function here. First of all, when you call it, it returns an array, and it's an array that has two things in it. One of them is your state variable. So I'm going to go over here to my square brackets, and I'm going to type in img width. That's the variable that is going to, that's our state variable here. Okay, the second thing that gets returned in the array by calling useState is the setter function for that variable. So we always, for that, we name it set image width. So it's going to be called set. It's going to start with set, okay, and then followed by the name of your state variable. So we have set image width right here. Okay, and here, if I want to initialize the image width state variable, I can pass that in as a parameter when I call useState. So I'm just going to initialize that image width to 100, like so. Okay, now, so yes, this is stuff that we learned about in the last video, but I'm just trying to reiterate it because it's really important to understand this. So what this means is that by turning this into a state variable, that means that whenever image width gets changed through the set function, it's going to force the component to re-render. It's going to recall, it's going to re-trigger our component function. Okay, and so what that means is that if we were to change the image width by calling the set function, it forces for the image width will change, and then it will re-render the component, and we'll see the change reflected in the user interface. Okay, so I do still have one more problem here. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And did it compile? Okay, I got a few warnings. I'm going to ignore the warnings, but it did compile. Okay, but I think it's going to give me a crash at runtime here. If I go back over to the browser and hit refresh and then press the button, here's where it crashes. Okay, so the problem here is similar to the error that we got before. It's an assignment to a constant variable. Okay, so image width is declared as a constant, so you can't change it. But you're not supposed to change state variables directly anyways. And if you want to change a state variable, you use the set function. So that's what the set image width is for here. So if I go over to my click handler for the onClick event right there, I'm going to change this to call the set function. So I'm going to do set img width like that, and then I can pass in a new width here. Let's just, how do I want to do? Let's just do this. We'll take the old width, so img width, and then we'll add 100 to it. Okay. All right. Now I can actually abbreviate this arrow function, as you know. I can, since there's only one statement inside the body of it, I can remove the curly braces like that. Okay. All right. So now if I go ahead and save this and then reload the page in the browser here, when I click the button, you'll see that the image grows by 100 pixels every time I click it. So that is what state variables are for. If you want them to be bound to the user interface in some way, meaning that if the state variable gets changed, you want your component to re-render to reflect the change. So that's what useState is all about in React. And that's what really reactivity is all about. It's where you've got variables that are displayed in the user interface in some way, and you want, if the variable changes, you want the user interface to display or to show those changes. And what React does is it re-renders the component. It re-invokes that component function with the new state. Okay, back over here in VS Code, I want to show you some people. Whoops, what did I do there? Let me get back to I wanted to move this out of the way like that. Okay, so some people would tell you that this is not the way you're supposed to make this change right here. I want to show you a slightly different way of doing this, and I don't mean to confuse you by inundating you with different ways to do something, but this is something that you'll see come up along the way when you're learning React. What I want to do is comment out this button right here. So I'm actually just going to put my cursor on that line, and I'm going to press Control and / like that. Okay, now that looks funny a little bit, but what it does is if you want to comment out code inside of your JSX, you use JavaScript comment. So we've got the / and the asterisk there, but remember that that has to be inside of curly braces. So anyways, that's what the comments are going to look like in React. You don't have to worry about it because you can just use Control / to toggle that. So if I press that, it'll toggle the comments. Okay, I want to comment that line out, and I'm actually going to copy it and paste it right below itself here like that. And I'm going to show you a slightly different variation of what we just did right here. The code that we have works, but some people would say that you shouldn't do it the way we did here. Now, it's because we're using the previous image width here to come up with the new image width that we want. So what I'm going to do here, and I don't even know if I should show you this because I don't mean to confuse you, but some people would say that you shouldn't do what we just did in the way we did it. So over here, I'm going to actually remove the parameter that we're passing into the set function. And they're saying what some people will say is if you're going to use the previous state to update the state, then what you should do is pass in an arrow function to the set method, to the set function. So here I'm going to put in an arrow function like that. And then now when React calls this function, it's going to pass in the previous value for you. So a lot of people will just name that parameter prev, and then here inside the body of the arrow function, we can we're going to return the new value. So here we'll do prev plus 100. Okay, and now this is a little bit tricky right here, but it's not actually returning anything unless I put a return statement in here. But what I can do to make it return prev plus 100 is I can remove the curly braces right here. So I'm going to remove the curly braces from the arrow function. And that's a tricky one. Let me know if you want to talk about that in class. But that's an implied return value right there. The other thing I can do to abbreviate this is since I have one and only one parameter being passed into my arrow function, I can remove the parentheses here like that. Okay, So here, now this is going to work the same as it did before, but people will say that if you're using the old state to come up with a new state, then you should be passing an arrow function into the set function like this. Let's see what this looks like in the browser. It should work the same way here. So I'm going to go ahead and press the button, and it looks like it's working.